Okay, welcome class. This is our review lecture for exam 2. It'll be opening up today and you'll have actually over a week to take it. It'll be 5 discussion questions, but they will have multiple parts, so please read each question carefully and answer each part of the question. Okay, take your time. You have 3 hours. I have opened it up for you for 3 hours. So take your time, answer each question as fully as you can. There's no point in rushing through it and giving a 2 or 3 sentence answer. It might be what you put down might be correct, but it doesn't fully answer the question. So take your time and use as much time as you need. You've got 3 hours to take it, and you will have over a week to decide when you are ready to take this exam. The third discussion question will be opening up this week as well, but you don't worry, you will have plenty of time to take it. Things are starting to come at you a little bit more frequently now. The pace of the course picks up a bit, but don't worry, I've given everybody plenty of time to answer not only the essay questions but any of the discussion questions. Okay, so again, there'll be 5 questions, and basically we're gonna kind of recap what they're about. Here it goes. First one has to do with gross domestic product. The big 3, remember, in macroeconomics: gross domestic product, unemployment, and inflation. So the first, gross domestic product. Well, what do we use it for? Well, we basically, in your textbook, they broke it down 3 ways we use it to measure our standard of living. Well, what does that mean, our standard of living? It means the quality of life. It could be life expectancy, it could be access to health care, education, infant mortality rates. In general, talk about, it measures how the people in an economy where GDP is growing, how they're doing. And generally, folks who live in an economy that has a strong gross domestic product, which is growing, are typically doing better than other people in other countries. Okay, so that's pretty much the first aspect of it. So cover it as fully as you can. The second tool or use of gross domestic product is measuring our economic growth. And remember, we talk about nominal GDP and real GDP. And nominal is a term you're going to see not only for gross domestic product, but you'll see for wages and other economic terms. What it basically means is nominal means in current dollars. However, when we are looking at economic growth, when we're looking at our own country and we're comparing it, let's say, this year as opposed to 20 years ago, well, we have to take out the inflation factor, okay? And when we take out the inflation factor, then we are left with real gross domestic product, okay? So that's what we use to compare year to year in an economy. We take the inflation factor out, and then we have real gross domestic product. Then we can compare what it is, for instance, this year as opposed to 20 years ago. Now, when we go a little bit further, when we want to compare our country to another country or any other country, we have to also take into consideration the population. So, for instance, as we said, China has 1.3, 1.4 billion people, and they have a pretty strong gross domestic product. But if we were comparing it to Norway, well, it would be unfair just to take, even if we took the inflation factor out, and we said, well, real GDP is this and real GDP is that in Norway. Well, Norway's got 5 million people, so we have to take into account the population. So we divide real GDP by the population, and we have a term, real GDP per capita. And that is the key measurement tool we use when we're comparing country to country. Okay, so that's how we go about that. Now the last one is to see exactly where we are in the business cycle. Okay, now we talked about the business cycle has 4 parts, and I want you to explain them to me. And basically, the 4 parts of the business cycle, we starting, the economy's growing, it's getting stronger and bigger and better. We call that an expansion or a recovery. All right, now in an expansion or in a recovery, typically we have, not typically, we have greater business activity, more transactions are occurring. However, it is important to note that it is possible to have a jobless recovery. We can have, doesn't happen very often, it's rare, but it is possible we can have a business expansion and yet jobs, employment is not growing at the same time. All right, that's the one phase of the business cycle, and then keeps growing till we hit a peak. And this economy's been heating up and finally hits a peak, and then from the peak, well, unfortunately, the only place to go is down, and that is called a recession or a contraction. Now, in a recession, we do have business contracting, but we also have increased unemployment. So every recession has been marked by not only business contraction, but also increased unemployment. And we keep going down until we finally bottom out, and that is the trough. All right? So if we take from peak to peak or trough to trough, covering all four segments of this business cycle, we have the business cycle. Typically, they were running about 6 to 8 years. When we came out of the Great Recession, we had a very, very, very long, slow, painful recovery, which somewhat stretched that cycle out. So is it going to be longer from here on out? Well, that remains to be seen. But historically, business cycles have gone about 6 to 8 years. Okay? So that's what we use gross domestic product for. All right? Now, we also talked about the 3 ways we measure and find out what is gross domestic product, what actually it is. The first one we talked about was output, total output. And every word of the output definition is important. It is the market value of all final goods and services produced domestically in an economy in a time frame, typically 1 year. All right. Now, again, these are new goods. They are final goods that have been produced, so they're new. Used textbooks don't count. Used cars don't count. And used products don't count because when they were new at one time in the past, they were counted then. So we don't want to double or triple count an item. So it has to be a new final good or service. Speaking of services, what is a service? Remember, we talked about that. It's a service is something that provides a benefit, all right, but not a tangible product, something you can put your hand on, all right? So it would be, for instance, if a company was manufacturing a pair of shoes, right, that would be a final good. But what about a shoe shine? Well, that would count, but you can't really put your hand on a shoe shine. It does provide a benefit, all right, but it's not actually something you can put your hand on. and we call that a service. And that's really important because, you know, we have moved from an agricultural economy to a manufacturing economy to now a service economy. So it's important that we have a good handle on what a service is. Okay? That would cover pretty much the output. Now also remember, financial instruments, stocks, bonds, they don't count either because they are what economists like to refer to as pretty much a transfer of wealth or ownership from one person to another, but it's not creating a new final good or service. So we don't count used products and we don't count things like stocks and bonds, all right? Now, we're going to talk about stocks and bonds in 1 minute when we refer to the third method of finding what GDP is, all right? So the first one is the output method. The second one is expenditures, total expenditures from every part of the economy. So that would be, you know, Y equals C plus I plus G plus exports minus imports. So C, number one, consumers, you and I. And what do we buy? Well, we typically buy durable and non-durable goods. And the difference between them is that durable exactly are what they say they are. They last a number of years, all right? Non-durable goods would be something like food that we would buy all the time. And whether or not we are in a recession or an expansion, we typically will buy non-durable goods. Durable goods give us a better indication of whether the economy is expanding or contracting. Because if the economy is getting better, typically people will buy that durable good, whether it's you know, a new television or even a car, furniture, something that's going to last for a long while, okay? Then what else do we have? Well, we've got investment spending, right? Typically, we think of firms with investment spending. Investment spending is spending that is done for future production purposes, all right? Something that's going to generate future production. So we have investment spending, and under that we also include inventories, because inventories are considered future sales. So we have investment spending, and we have government spending on goods and services, and then we have what they call net exports. We have our exports minus our imports. So talk about that, and that will give us our second method of finding out what gross domestic product is. The third method is sources. It's total factor income. And who are the factors of production? Well, you and I, we are the factors of production. So all the income that comes into households, you know, us, who are factors of production. Typically that would be our salary or wages. Now, dividends that bonds or stocks pay us, that would count as income. So we do count the income, all right? We wouldn't count buying or selling stocks or bonds, but income, dividend income or interest income is accounted under the third method. So we do count that. So we have typically wages, salaries, rents. If you rent out you have a small building that you rent out to a firm or something, in that order, we would count that, we would count dividends, and we would count interest. So all income coming into the households, all right? So we call that total factor income, okay? Now, gross domestic product, are there problems? Sure. Gross domestic product isn't perfect. And an example would be if you're going to get your car washed. If it's a nice day today and you're thinking of getting your car washed and you were going there and then there was a big line and then you decide, oh, forget it, I'm going to take it home and wash it myself. Well, okay, what happened? Well, gross domestic product could have gone up if you had gone to the car wash, but it didn't because you decided to wash your car yourself. Same thing as if you marry your housekeeper. If that happens, well, actually, gross domestic product will actually go down slightly because you were paying a cleaning service, and now you're no longer paying that cleaning service. So, gross domestic product isn't perfect. It doesn't count all the illegal activities either. Although in Europe they are including more and more of them to get their gross domestic product up a bit. But typically we don't count illegal activities, and other activities such as getting your car washed or not can affect gross domestic product. So it's not perfect, but it's probably is the best tool that we have, okay? It's different from gross national product, all right? Gross national product was the term we used when I was in school, when I was your age. We didn't use gross domestic product very often. Gross national product had to do with the total sales. For instance, if you had a domestic company, but it had plants, maybe 4 or 5 plants in other countries, all those sales would count for that domestic company, okay, under gross national product. Gross domestic product does not count sales that are occurring outside of the borders of our country, okay? Now, gross national product would not count, for instance, sales of let's say BMW or Volkswagen located a plant here, and they have, obviously, and they're doing a lot of business. Well, under gross national product, we wouldn't count those sales, okay? Now, with the advent of globalization, through the 60s, 70s, and it's just been getting bigger and bigger, they've gone to gross domestic product because they want to see what is happening inside the borders of a particular country. And it's probably accurate to use that term now. It gives us a better idea of what is happening, in the country, okay? So the difference, again, between gross domestic product, gross national product is gross national product counts domestic companies, whether they have plants, overseas or not, all their sales, but it doesn't count any foreign companies that are located here that are doing business here, okay? Whereas gross domestic product is just looking at, what is being made in the country, whether it's a domestic corporation or a foreign corporation, okay? All right, depreciation. Again, we're going to be looking at depreciation a little bit more when we start looking at growth theory, okay? But depreciation, it's just the loss of value of your asset, either through age or use. Okay, so time or use can devalue your asset, and this pretty much makes sense. I mean, it's common sense that if you have an asset and you're using it quite a bit, some of its value it's going to go down. Typically, a big machining center, for instance. Well, either age and or use can take the value away from that. Now, if we have that depreciation figure and we subtract it from gross domestic product, we end up with what is called net domestic product. So, for instance, if the economy was doing $23 trillion in gross domestic product this year, and we said, well, okay, yeah, but we had 1 trillion of equipment that had to be, that's lost its value. So we should subtract that out of the 23. So when we take in consideration depreciation, we have what is known as net domestic product. Okay? And that will take us for the first two, and we will go on to the next questions we've got. come to the first of the great evils of macroeconomics, unemployment. Okay? Now remember, we talked about 4 types. Now, in our textbook, they only covered 3, but we did mention seasonal. Now, seasonal is probably the least type of employment that has the least impact on us, but still mention it in your answer, okay? We have 4 types: frictional, structural, cyclical, and seasonal, all right? The first one we talked about, frictional. We always are having folks changing jobs or moving. However, they in this moving or changing jobs, there are other jobs that are out there waiting for them, okay? They haven't taken the new job yet. They're looking at their prospects. Or let's say you're going to move to California and there's 3 or 4 companies that are very interested in you. Now you feel pretty confident you're going to get a job with one of them, but you haven't gotten it yet. So they call that frictional. It's just a question of lining up the jobs that companies have with the people, the right people who have the skills. Okay, so typically this isn't a long-term type of unemployment. Okay, might be a month or 2. And are you worried about it? You're not that worried about it because the skill set that you have is in demand. It's a question of just that, you're moving or you're switching jobs, whatever, and you just haven't lined up the right job, okay? Structural is a little more involved, and it is more severe. Structural means that something happened in the economy that has changed the actual structure of a type of business or industry, okay? Now, that can and normally is much longer than just frictional unemployment. We always have frictional and we always have structural unemployment with us because, as we talked about, economies are always evolving, okay? They're always changing. Industries are being created, and unfortunately some industries are dying, all right? Structural has to do with something happened, whether it's an invention, for instance, the automobile, that caused certain industries to get smaller or to die off completely. Example would be the buggy whip. Was a classic example, that they use. Now, sometimes there's a happy ending. For instance, when we talk about the Fisher, Body by Fisher, they made the carriages for the horse-drawn carriages. Now, when the automobile came into being, they were able to transition into making the bodies for General Motors cars. So if you and I worked for the Fisher Body Company, we would be out of work temporarily while they retooled to make bodies for the automobiles. And yes, the structure has changed and the old industry was dying, but that one had a happy ending. Sometimes it's a lot longer, and occasionally an industry will die and your skill set might not be really needed, and typically you'll have to be retrained. So that can involve a lot more time and unfortunately a lot more pain, okay? So we talk about that. Those two combined, again, those 2 types of unemployment, we always have with us, even when the economy is at what economists like to say, full employment. Even when we're at full employment, we will still have frictional and structural unemployment. So for instance, if, and the latest figures have been very good on unemployment, but let's say the economy is healthy, everything's going well, but we still will have these two types of unemployment with us, and let's say that totals out to about 4%, okay? Well, that is what they call the natural rate. So even when the economy is doing well, we will still have a natural rate of 4%. People are changing jobs, or some industry is dying off, getting smaller, and people have to be retrained for the new industries. So we'll always have the natural rate of 4% with us. Now, if the economy actually starts to slow down and goes into a recession, then we have the most severe type of unemployment, cyclical, okay? That means we are in a recession. Business is contracting, and what would happen here is that perhaps the unemployment might go up to 8%, okay, during a recession. Well, what's happened is we have the 4% natural, but we have an additional 4% unemployment from the recession, okay? So that's giving us 8%, right? That is the scariest type of unemployment because of the unknown factor. You know, we don't know how long is this going to be. Even some of the best economists in the country, you know, say, well, how long is this going to go on? And a lot of them, most of them, can't really tell you how long this is going to be. All right, is it going to be 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years? So this is the most severe type. We are in a recession. Business has contracted. Unemployment is up, okay? Up way above the natural rate, okay? The last one, seasonal. It's probably not as bad. It's something the economy anticipates. They've made allowances for. It happens every year, okay? And so it's not that major a factor, but it's still something that we should mention, okay? Should bring up. All right, now employed or unemployed, yes, there are problems with those terms, employed and unemployed. Again, you can be employed and only be working 25, 26 hours a week, but you can't support a family on 26 hours a week. You want full employment, but for one reason or another, the company doesn't want to offer it to you, okay? Well, you're considered employed, unfortunately, even though you want full employment. A lot of companies will purposely keep the folks, at least a certain percentage of their people, under 30 hours in order to avoid picking up all the other benefits, all right? So being employed doesn't mean, everything's fine and you can provide for your family. You could be just working part-time. Or you could have a PhD, and again, let me preface this by saying there is dignity in all work. But if, let's say you have a PhD in something and you're mopping the floor at Taco Bell, okay? There's nothing wrong with that work, but if you have a PhD, let's face it, you are overqualified for that job. Now, again, it doesn't take that in consideration; it just counts you as employed. Okay, so there are problems with that, and unemployed also. If you're just we are in a recession, let's say, and things aren't we're not now. I've never seen so many want ads or signs for help wanted. But let's say we were in a recession, and you've been looking for work for quite a while, and you just say, oh, the heck with it, I'm gonna take this next month off. I'm not gonna be looking for work. Well, if that happens, then you're not considered unemployed anymore. Okay, so you have to be actively looking for work. And, that does happen. I mean, I remember the recession back in 1980. And yeah, people were tired of trying to find that job, okay? And they did stop looking. All right, well, those folks would be no longer considered unemployed. Okay? All right, so that covers unemployment pretty much, and that would be typically the third question on the exam. And that will bring us up to our last two questions, 4 and 5. And that has to do with inflation, all right, or deflation, okay? Something having to do with the price level, all right? The second great evil of macroeconomics. Inflation, what is it? Well, it is the general rise in the price level, okay? Deflation is just the opposite. It is the general lowering of the price level. Are there problems with these? Yeah, absolutely. With inflation, basically what's happening is our money is becoming not worthless, unless of course we go into hyperinflation, but it is becoming worth a little less, all right? It's losing its purchasing power, all right? With deflation, the money is appreciating, okay? It's increasing in value, all right? So there are problems with both of these. With inflation, people are trying to get out of holding money. They don't want to hold on to money because it is losing its purchasing power. With deflation, people are holding on to their money. However, that can be just as bad or even worse because, for example, what happened during the Great Depression, we had deflation running 30-some percent. Prices were going down that much. Now, you and I might think of, well, prices staying the same or maybe going down a touch. That doesn't sound like such a bad idea. But when it goes down 30-some percent, what's happening? Well, people are holding on to their money. And that's exactly what happened in the Great Depression. And again, not that the poor folks had that much money to hang on to anyway, but the few dollars that they did have, they held on to them and they spent it at the very, 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 very last minute. So when everybody was doing that, it was causing, the overall demand, aggregate demand to go down and drove the economy even further from a severe recession into the Great Depression. Something like, we talked about the paradox of thrift, savings is a good thing. It's a good thing for an economy. We need that pool of funds that firms, governments, and you and I can draw upon when we want to, borrow money. But if everybody saves too much, then what happens is people stop spending money, and then the economy dries up. So that's not good. So savings is good. However, if people take it too far, as they did in Japan a number of years ago, the economy tends to dry up. So with deflation, again, having prices go down a bit doesn't sound bad, but when they start to really go down and people start hanging on to their money because the money is appreciating, it's going to be have severe consequences for the economy. Okay? All right. So the causes. Well, they talk about demand pull, and that has to do with an increase in overall demand, pulling up the prices, pulling up the inflation, causing inflation to take off. Great example of that would be what's happened in China. Now that they've opened up their markets, China is developing a middle class. And now when you're talking 1.3, 1.4 billion people, you're talking about a lot of people in the world. And this middle class, they have a taste for chocolate. They really like chocolate. So, you have an overall demand pulling up the price of chocolate. Now, again, there was a drought which did cause the supply to go down a touch. But even if there wasn't a drought, okay, when you're looking at 1.3, 1.4 billion people all of a sudden able to afford things like chocolate, and the demand is growing, that's going to pull up the prices of chocolate, and that's exactly what's happened. Okay, Then we also have cost push. Okay, what's that? That has to do with, well, when the supply curve shifts to the left. Okay, remember we said a shift to the left is less. If a key input goes up substantially, firms, stands to reason, are going to make less of a product. Okay, now this happened in the 70s when we had OPEC raise the price of oil substantially, twice in the 70s, resulting in a severe recession in the 1980, okay? Because oil is something that it just doesn't affect one segment of the economy or another, or a couple of types of businesses. Oil is one of those commodities that cuts clear across the board. It affects businesses in general, and that's exactly what happened. So, and as a matter of fact, we had both. We had, unfortunately, 1980, we had prices going way up, and we had a stagnant economy, or we were in a recession. So that's where we came up with the term stagflation, because we had a stagnant economy and inflation. Okay, so when you have costs going up, as we did in 1970s, you're going to have prices going up. You're going to have inflation. Now, maybe it's not either one of these. Maybe it is something else. And when you looked at that equation of exchange, the money supply times the velocity, the number of times money turns over an economy, is equal to the price level, overall price level, times, everything, gross domestic product. So price times quantity is equal to the money supply times the number of times it turns over. Now, why would a government increase their money supply? Well, it's very tempting for a government to increase their money supply. It can pay for certain items or certain debts. Unfortunately, it can get out of hand. It did for Germany in the 1920s, actually to finance World War I, and then in early 1920s, they were printing money like mad, and it went into not only inflation, it went into hyperinflation. The money didn't lose its value, it lost almost all of its value. Zimbabwe did that in 2008. It was one of the greatest inflations ever. I think they were was 79.6 billion% per month. I mean, the numbers are so staggering. It's hard to get your mind around that. Okay, so increasing the money supply will cause inflation, and again, it's just kind of common sense. I mean, if you've got your economy and you've increased the money supply, so we have spending way up here, and the productive capacity of your economy is down here, well, as President Reagan said, you've got too much money chasing too few goods. So if you've got your money supply up here and your spending's up here, but the economy is only producing at this level, well, it stands to reason you absolutely are going to have inflation, okay? Now, how do we measure inflation? What's going on? Well, we use the Consumer Price Index. And again, what's that? It is a market basket, typical market basket of goods and services that a typical family of four living in a medium-sized city would buy, okay? Housing makes up the CPI. What else? Well, you got transportation. Now that could include the price of your car and gas. Unfortunately, that's what we're seeing now. We see, gas prices going up. Hopefully, it will subside later on in the year, but at least in the short term, it looks like we're going to have some pretty expensive. I got gas the other day, and I almost had a stroke. What the prices have gone up to. So you've got housing, you've got transportation, food, medical attention. Now, in your case, you folks are really young and you've got your whole life ahead of you, so typically your medical expenses aren't going to be that high. I think in our textbook it was around 8%, 8.9. Yours might be lower, but as you age and you get to be mature, that percentage could rise. Anyway, it's what a typical family of four would buy in a year, okay? And they try to keep that market basket the same year after year after year, so we can compare, what prices are doing. So if we go back 20 years and we have that market basket and we use that as our base year, we say, all right, that's 100. And then we go forward 20 years and we say, what does that basket of goods and services cost now? And it's 140 or 120, let's say. Say, well, we've had a 20%, increase, in the price of that market basket. So that's how that's the tool we use to measure inflation. Now it's one tool that your grandparents are probably pretty happy with, because they're pretty happy with the Social Security check that they got in January and last month, because the Consumer Price Index adjusted the amount of the Social Security that was paid out, and that was the biggest increase we've had in a number of years. Okay, now the PPI is the Producer Price Index. Okay, now that is the raw materials that industry producers would use. Coal, steel, electricity, aluminum. All right, now watching the prices of those commodities go up is important, because obviously, if you're buying something and you look at it and say, wow, the price has gone up, 20%. Well, before the price of that final good went up 20%, go back 6-8 months, the component parts to it, went up first, okay? The rubber, the steel, the plastic, whatever. So they use the Producer Price Index as an early warning sign of inflation, okay? Problems with the Consumer Price Index, and again, you can elaborate on this in your answer, but substitution, what is in that market basket, perhaps you and I could substitute another good for, okay? And folks do that, all right? So Consumer Price Index might be overstating inflation a bit, okay? Quality, typically, yes, the quality of, and we're going to get into this a lot more when we talk about growth theory. Quality, let's say price of a television was in that market basket. Well, you can't compare the flat screen TVs they have today to the old black and white TVs from years ago. I mean, the quality, there's no comparison really. Okay, and then there's new products. Okay, products that we didn't have before. All right, and in today's day and age, we constantly are experiencing new products that we use quite a bit. Okay, so those are the problems with the Consumer Price Index. Now, typically the cost of inflation. Basically, your book broke it down into 7. So and that covers it pretty well. So we'll stay with 7. So don't give me 5 or 4 if the question is the cost of inflation. Number 1, shoe leather cost. That means people trying to get out of holding cash. They're doing everything that they can. They're running around trying to get out of holding cash. Why? Because cash is losing its purchasing power. Okay? So all the time, effort, energy that you spend trying to get out of holding cash, they lump that under shoe leather cost. Money illusion. Okay? What does that mean? Well, for instance, they were talking about a year or two ago how the wages have been relatively stagnant over the past few years. Well, now latest figures, wage increases are around 6%. Now, at first blush, that sounds pretty good. 6%, okay, that sounds, not too bad. However, if we have inflation at 7 or approaching 8%, let's just say it's at 8%, you have a 6%, wage increase, but we have an 8% inflation rate. Again, it's talking about nominal and real. You have a nominal 6% wage increase, but when we take in account inflation of 8%, our real wages have gone down 2%, okay? So it creates money illusion. Then menu costs. Typically, they lump all the costs that a business would have in changing their prices. Not as dramatic as it used to be due to electronics, but still, there are costs involved in changing your pricing, okay? Uncertainty. That is a big fear. Just as uncertainty exists in unemployment, here in inflation, what do you ask for if you're asking for a raise where you work? Or if you have a business and you're offered a long-term contract, do you take it? Do you not take it? If General Motors says, hey, here's a 3-year contract, however, you have to hold your prices. Well, do you want to keep it or not? I mean, if you went through a period that we did go through where inflation was hardly existent at all, it wouldn't be too bad. However, if you're thinking inflation's at 7 or 8% and it could go up higher, you're uncertain whether or not to take that contract. Years and years ago, when inflation took off, I knew a company. It was a stamping company, and they accepted a long-term contract with one of the big three, and they actually went bankrupt. Okay, so there's a lot of uncertainty, and do you build in an increase in your prices, or do you say no? I'm demanding a reopener in this long-term contract. So there's a lot of uncertainty. Okay, wealth redistribution. All right. Typically, that has to do with folks borrowing money. All right. Now, if you borrowed a large chunk of money and you're paying it back over 5 or 6 years, and inflation, really starts to take off 10, 11, 12%. Well, you're paying that money back, and the money it's not worthless, but every year it's worth a little less as you're paying the bank back. So you are what they call, you are the winner, in that scenario. But the reverse could also happen if we have deflation. That's what happened, during the Great Depression. We had farmers, we had folks who had pretty good sized mortgages. When prices were going down, it was just the reverse. They were paying those loans back with money that was a lot more expensive. It had a lot more appreciation to it, okay? But with inflation, typically we have wealth redistribution, and the big winners are the borrowers. I don't think I've ever had a class I don't think I've ever had students, feel sorry for the banks with this wealth redistribution, but it does occur with inflation, okay? Price confusion, all right? That has to do with, let's say you're manufacturing something and the price is going up. Well, is it going up because the actual demand is there and people really want your product a lot more, or is it just inflation? That's important because if you're looking at investing in a large piece of equipment, a very expensive piece of equipment, well, you want to know, you better know whether if it's real demand is there, and it's caused the price to going up for your product, or if it's just fluff, if it's just inflation, okay? And the last is tax distortion, right? There's a big difference, and this is true. There's a big difference between buying something and having its value go up, and then you sell it a year or two later, And all right, you pay a long-term capital gains tax on it. Okay, well, you made a good investment. It actually went up in value. There's a big difference between that and, let's say, buying a piece of property for $100,000. A year from now, we've had 20% inflation, and you sell it for $120,000. The value, actual value of that property never went up. So you have $20,000 worth of actual inflation that you have to pay tax on, okay? So there's a big difference there. That's tax distortion. Winners and losers, all right. Again, the lenders would be the losers. The winners would be the borrowers. Winners would be people, let's say you and I. For instance, let's say inflation is running at 10%. You and I got our wages adjusted in January. They call it being first in line, okay? Well, there's a big difference between getting our wages adjusted in January or having to wait till the end of November or December to get our wages adjusted, okay? So winners would typically be what they call, folks, first in line for wage adjustments. Also winners, companies that have reopener clauses. They can get some price relief, right? Losers would be companies that are locked in with a long-term contract, or folks at the end of the line, okay? Losers also would be typical that older couple that are on a fixed income. Those folks would be considered the losers, all right? All right, so that pretty much covers our test. Everybody's doing pretty well. Take your time in answering it. There's no point in being brief. They say brevity is the soul of wit, but it's not the best way to get a great grade in an essay exam in economics, okay? All right, so everybody take care, and I'll see you next time.